Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to kick off the first day of the Understanding Society Survey Methods Conference. I'm delighted to present research findings from some of the work to engage respondents and improve participation that has been done on the US panel study of income dynamics. I'd like to acknowledge my collaborators on this work, including Narayan Sastry, Vicki Friedman, Bob Shaney, and Mick Cooper, at the Survey Research Center at the University of Michigan, and Shonda Kruger-Ndaye, who has been the PSID survey director for many waves. I'd also like to acknowledge the Understanding Society study and its team of survey methodologists. Their innovative methodological work over the past decade has provided invaluable insights and a strong foundation for panel survey methods that has greatly influenced PSID's own methods research. Here's an overview of my talk today. First, I'll describe the key design features of PSID as some background. Then I'll review recent data collection challenges that PSID has experienced, along with other household panel studies worldwide. I'll describe strategies used to cope with these challenges, including ways to communicate with respondents, incentive strategies, and the use of new technologies. And then I'll identify next steps and areas for future research. To set the stage, I'll first review key study design features. PSID is a household panel study of US families that began in 1968 with a nationally representative sample of 5,000 families. And as of 2021, we've collected data across 42 waves, and the sample has grown to about 11,000 families. There have been two major efforts to add new immigrants, one in 1997 and one in 2017, in order to maintain the representation of the study to US families. A key design feature of the PSID is that it is a genealogical panel. Adult children of original families get interviewed when they achieve economic independence, and this feature naturally refreshes the sample and allows it to grow over time. There are two major ongoing supplemental studies that are a fundamental part of PSID, and they are intertwined in all data collection strategies and decisions. The Child Development Supplement, which collects data on children and adolescents since 1997, and the Transition into Adulthood Supplement that has interviewed young adults since 2005. And as I'll describe, while PSID lacks an innovation panel, such as the one in Understanding Society, TAS has been a primary test bed for methods work in the PSID. There are several noteworthy data collection design features. First, PSID has primarily been a telephone-administered study with a small share of families receiving in-person visits. In 2021, the study shifted to a mixed mode design using web and Caddy. The interview itself is long and complex, around 80 minutes on average, and a variety of information is collected, including detailed income, employment, household living arrangements, and an extensive section on health. All of this information is collected from one knowledgeable respondent in the family, typically a pre-identified reference person or the spouse or partner of the reference person. To achieve response rate goals, PSID has a long field period, about 9 months starting in March and a firm end date of December 31st. We conduct data collection every other year. The study has used incentives since its inception, including a post-paid monetary incentive that roughly matches the number of interview minutes, with a small increase every third wave for inflation. The incentive is $80 in 2021. And a final note, after 2 waves of non-response, sample families are permanently dropped from the study. Like household surveys worldwide, in recent waves, PSID has experienced fieldwork challenges, and these challenges have been an impetus for recent adaptive methods work. PSID has historically achieved very high response rates. The wave-to-wave response rate, or the re-interview response rate, from the earliest waves until about 2011 they were consistently between 96 and 98%. This slide shows response rates since 2003, with the red line indicating the re-interview response rate and the blue line showing the overall response rate, which adds families who did not participate in the prior wave and new sample families. And you can see that the re-interview response rate has generally gradually declined in recent waves, and it started ticking down after 2011 to about 93% in 2019. The overall response rate in blue edged below 90% in 2019 for the first time since the earliest waves. And while these response rates remain high, even the slightest declines accumulate and can affect the representation of the study. And moreover, achieving these response rates is coming at an increasing cost in fieldwork effort. To illustrate the increasing effort needed to complete an interview, this slide shows how the number of interviewer contact attempts over the past 9 waves has increased. The average number of attempts in 2019 was about 20. That's about double the number in 2003. And the median also nearly doubled to 10 attempts in 2019 from a little more than 5 in 2003. So I'm going to turn to the central theme of my talk and review strategies used by PSID to cope with recent fieldwork challenges, including how we communicate to respondents, incentive strategies, and the use of new technologies. Implementing these strategies uses an approach that aims to increase respondents' perception of the benefits of participating and making these benefits salient. This approach fits with social psychological theories of survey participation that make the basic prediction that on average, respondents are more likely to participate if the perceived rewards, such as the study incentive and contributing to science, outweigh the costs, including the time and effort and opportunity costs of participation. These theories suggest that survey features that highlight benefits of participation will have positive effects on respondent engagement, and in turn, this should lead to improved fieldwork outcomes, such as reduced effort and cost to complete an interview. So first, we use a variety of respondent communication strategies to keep track of our families and encourage them to complete the interview. We give special attention to maintaining updated respondent contact information, and we provide a small incentive to families in exchange for updating or verifying the prior wave information before we start collecting data each wave. Our protocols are based on experimental work where we have found positive effects of the contact update mailing on reducing tracking and fieldwork effort. We also have a respondent website as a central hub for study information. This has many benefits, including underscoring the legitimacy of the request for participation, especially for new respondents. During data collection, we use different modes to encourage respondents to participate, including postal mailings, phone calls, emails, and text messages. And in recent waves, we've increased the use of text messaging. In this slide, you can see some examples of text messages being used on Core 2021. We use a fairly intensive contact protocol, sending 2 to 3 reminders a week, and a variety of appeals for participation. All of the texts mention the incentive, and they all have authenticated links to the web instrument, allowing respondents to immediately access the interview. We have also used a variety of incentive strategies in addition to the standard study incentive. We have just started offering respondents electronic payments. This is an option that transfers the incentive from a vendor directly to a respondent's bank account. And our messages to respondents highlight that in addition to the generous incentive for completing the interview, they can get it quickly using ePay. These payments are typically processed within 24 hours compared to a bank check, which can take up to 2 weeks. ePay also saves study resources by eliminating the need to process these checks. So for many waves, we've offered cash or non-monetary incentives for face-to-face interviews, often done with especially resistant families. We've also provided small finder's fees to family members for help locating some respondents, and we've offered cell phone bonuses for those who may have limited minutes on their cell phone plans to compensate for the time the interview takes. A more recent focus in the last few waves is targeting incentive strategies to different groups, such as respondents at high risk of non-response. At the start of Fieldwork, we now routinely offer an extra incentive with special messaging in addition to the baseline incentive for two groups. One group consists of prior wave non-respondents, who in our messaging we welcome back to the study. And the other group comprises new sample members who receive a welcome to the study message. We're careful to differentiate these special offers from the baseline study incentive to highlight that they are a one-time special payment. And once an interview is completed by respondents in these groups, they are no longer eligible for these special offers in the following waves. Starting in 2015, we began using a responsive incentive strategy to cope with the growing share of cases still active at the end of the study and at risk for non-response. In the final 6 weeks of data collection, we offered a doubled incentive to all remaining sample members, and we did so despite uncertainty about how this might affect data collection outcomes in the next wave, when the incentive would be returned to the baseline amount. Our questions were, would the increased incentive entice these difficult cases to respond in the current wave? Would it create expectations for a higher incentive in the next wave that would permanently increase our study costs? We used observational data to examine the outcomes for these cases, and we found that nearly 60% responded to the doubled incentive, and we achieved our immediate goals. In the following wave, nearly 89% completed the interview, and despite our concerns that the costs would carry over to the next wave, nearly 3/4 completed the interview for the baseline offer and required about 1/3 of the number of contact attempts needed in the prior wave, so our costs actually declined. This strategy was used again in the most recent waves. A significant downside is that these difficult cases require many months of fieldwork and high effort by interviewers, making them very expensive. So we decided to experiment with a new approach in 2019, where instead of waiting to the end of the field period, we identified high effort cases and we offered the higher incentive on day one of fieldwork. And we called this an early bird intervention. So we identified cases at the 75th percentile of contact attempts in the prior wave. We randomized 800 to a treatment group, and we offered them $150 for completing the interview in the first month of fieldwork, after which the incentive would be returned to the baseline of $75. We randomized 400 to a control group, and we offered them the standard baseline incentive of $75. The experimental intervention was a note, you can see it here, attached to the front of the advanced study letter for respondents in the treatment-only group, describing the increased incentive to be provided for completing the interview in the first 30 days. The letter sent to the control group was identical, but it did not include the additional note. And so with this intervention, we had concerns about potential backfire effects from these difficult cases who did not take up the offer. Would they become even more resistant after the offer was withdrawn? We examined response rates, contact attempts, and days in the field. We also examined whether the intervention introduced sample bias by evaluating heterogeneous treatment effects by respondent characteristics. So we examined results across 3 phases of fieldwork. During the early bird offer period itself, which lasted 4 weeks and offered $150 to the treatment group and $75 to the control group. During main production, which spanned 32 weeks of fieldwork and offered remaining cases in both groups the baseline incentive, and during the endgame offer period, which lasted about 6 weeks until the end of fieldwork, and offered $150 to remaining cases from both groups. Overall, we found very positive effects of this intervention on response rates. By the end of the offer period, more than half of the treatment cases responded, compared to about 15% of the control group, a difference of more than 40 percentage points. By the end of fieldwork, we continued to find a positive outcome. Those assigned to the treatment group had a slightly higher final response rate by about 4 percentage points than the control group. And to address the issue of whether there was a backfire effect, such as those cases in the treatment group that for whatever reason did not complete their interview during the offer period, we looked at incremental response rates, which show the proportion responding in each phase among all cases, with the totals for the treatment group and control group summing to 100% across the 3 phases. So focusing just on the period of main production after the early bird offer expired and the incentive was returned to baseline, nearly a quarter of all treatment cases completed an interview, compared to about 58% of control cases. The higher completion rate among the control cases during this phase is expected, since so many more remained active after the early bird offer period compared to the treatment group. The incremental endgame response rates were not significantly different for the 2 groups. So what this shows is no backfire effect for the treatment group. There continued to be strong completion rates after the early bird offer expired and the incentive was cut in half. And at the end of fieldwork, the treatment group remained as responsive as the control group to the endgame offer. We also realized savings in fieldwork effort of about 9 contact attempts, or about 25% of all contact attempts on average by the end of fieldwork. And we found that treatment cases had significantly faster completion, with the average number of days in the field reduced by 50 days compared to the control group. And finally, we also examined whether the treatment effects varied by characteristics of these high effort respondents. We found that respondents at or above the 90th percentile of total family income were highly responsive to the intervention. So on the left side of the slide, you can see that the total effect of the intervention for the treatment group was similar for high income respondents in dark blue and lower income respondents in light blue, who had rates of early response that did not differ. However, the control group results show that the high income respondents, given the standard treatment, are much less likely to respond than the lower income respondents given the standard treatment. By the end of fieldwork, as shown on the right, the income difference within the control group remained, with significantly fewer high income respondents completing an interview compared to the lower income respondents. But in the treatment group, high income respondents had a final response rate nearly 7 percentage points greater than high income control cases, although the difference was marginally significant. Thus, the early bird intervention was effective for both income groups, but it had the unexpected and positive effect of removing the differential in response between high and lower income respondents, and an important potential source of sample bias. So to briefly summarize, we found that targeting these hard cases early was effective. It saved fieldwork effort and costs. Most took up the offer, freeing up interviewers to work on other cases. And of those not taking up the offer, the majority eventually completed the interview, and a non-trivial share did so when the offer was returned to baseline. The intervention was especially effective with high income respondents. So taken together, the work on endgame incentive boosts and the early bird intervention raise several design issues for incentive strategies in panel studies. One issue is how we communicate to respondents about special incentive treatments in targeted designs. The current design used a positively framed message describing a bonus in exchange for taking up a special offer. Drawing again on social psychological theories that can be applied to survey participation, prospect theory and others predict that individuals are more sensitive to losses than to gains of equal sizes. And there is evidence consistent with this, including research by Peter Lynn, that messages highlighting negative consequences of non-participation may have stronger effects for some respondents on cooperation than messages emphasizing benefits. The issue of how to frame respondent messages merits additional research and may enhance the effectiveness of incentives. A second issue is defining the optimal offer period for special incentives. Additional research should examine how the length of the offer period affects the take-up rate. So for example, longer offer periods might provide individuals with a greater opportunity to respond, but might also reduce time pressure and a sense of urgency and be less successful in motivating a response in time to save study resources. The third issue is defining the optimal size of special incentive offers. We found that a large incentive amount that was double the standard incentive was highly effective. Future research should examine whether lower amounts are equally successful and thus more cost-effective. And finally, more research is needed on managing incentives across waves in panel studies. We found no negative effects from endgame incentive boosts after one wave, and we found respondents targeted for the early bird incentive continued to respond at high rates even after the offer expired. But more research is needed to examine the effects over longer time periods in order to develop protocols for managing differential incentives. I'm going to switch gears and review experimental work based on data collected from young adults in the Transition into Adulthood Supplement. TAS has conducted 8 waves through 2019, and wave 9 launches at the end of this month. Through the 2017 wave, data were collected primarily using CADI. Starting in 2019, TAS shifted to a mixed mode design using web and CADI. And the study is on the same schedule as core. As soon as the core interview is completed, eligible respondents are contacted for an interview, and fieldwork lasts about 8 months. Each wave, approximately 3,000 young adults are eligible, and response rates have been between 89 and 92%. The content focuses on markers of the transition to adulthood, such as schooling, employment, health, and relationships with peers and family. As with core PSID, in recent waves, TAS has experienced growing fieldwork challenges, including increasing effort by interviewers to contact respondents to complete their interview. This age group is also challenging due to their greater mobility and frequent turnover of contact information, including addresses and phone numbers, making them hard to reach. I'll now describe 2 recent experiments conducted in TAS. The first is an assessment of an online interview appointment scheduler, and the second is an experimental evaluation of the shift in 2019 to a mixed mode study design. Both experiments are evaluations of new technologies designed to engage respondents and reduce burden and save fieldwork resources. Okay, so first, we developed and tested an online interview appointment scheduler. These schedulers are increasingly used in daily life for all sorts of services, such as medical appointments, restaurant reservations, etc. There are also potential benefits in the survey context. A main one is reducing interviewer resources to complete the interview. So to illustrate, during a recent wave of TAS, each interview required an average of 22 interviewer attempts to complete. And it's rare for a respondent to do the interview on the first successful contact by an interviewer. And so this means that the vast majority of these 22 attempts are simply to contact the respondent to schedule the interview appointment. Reducing this effort should have cost savings and free up interviewer time to focus on other cases. Respondents who self-schedule should also have a better survey experience by virtue of receiving fewer calls and messages from interviewers. They should also be able to schedule their appointment at their own convenience and select an appointment date and time in a thoughtful manner versus being pressed on the phone by an interviewer. And these advantages should lead to improved fieldwork outcomes. We tested a self-scheduler during the 2017 wave of TAS. We randomized 1,000 respondents to the experiment, with half offered the use of an online scheduler to select their own interview day and time, and half were assigned to a control group. And they received the standard treatment that did not include an offer to use a scheduler. At the launch of data collection, the advance letter to the treatment group described the availability and the web address of the scheduler with a message you can see here encouraging its use. The letter sent to the control group was the same, except it did not reference the scheduler. Equivalent reminders to complete the interview were sent to both groups. Only the treatment group was reminded to use the scheduler. Here's what the scheduler looked like. It was a standard commercial product that allowed respondents to choose the day and time to do their interview. Respondents could choose to receive either a text or an email reminder 24 hours before the appointment. And control group cases were also reminded by interviewers 24 hours before their appointment. So we examined the following questions. Does a scheduler reduce fieldwork effort, defined as the number of interviewer contact attempts and days in the field to finalize the case, and the number of sessions to complete the interview? For this set of results, we provide unbiased estimates by considering all cases as assigned to their respective experimental condition, regardless of whether or not the scheduler was actually used. We also examined how many respondents actually used the scheduler, and a second set of analyses considers the fieldwork outcomes for these respondents only. And as a practical matter, this information is useful. However, these findings may be biased, as factors related to the reasons that particular respondents take up the scheduler may also affect fieldwork outcomes. Okay, so the first result is that respondents offered the scheduler in red completed the interview significantly faster than the control group in blue. And this was true especially early in the field period. It took about 2.5 weeks to complete 25% of the cases in the treatment group and about 4 weeks for the control group. Half the treatment cases completed in 44 days compared to 56 days for the control group. There was no difference between the groups beyond the 50th percentile, and by the end of fieldwork, both groups achieved high overall response rates that did not differ. We found modest reductions in fieldwork effort for the treatment group. They received about 2 fewer calls on average to finalize the interview compared to the control group. There were no differences between the groups in average email, text attempts, or in the number of sessions to complete the interview. This slide shows fieldwork effort among the subset of respondents in the treatment group who actually used the scheduler. We found that nearly 1/3 of those who were offered the scheduler used it to set an interview appointment. Fieldwork effort for these respondents was dramatically lower than for the control group, saving an average of nearly 8 calls and 2.5 emails or text messages. About half as many of those using the scheduler required multiple interview sessions compared to the control group. We generated a basic estimate of fieldwork costs associated with contact attempts for each experimental condition. Costs due to interviewer contact attempts are a main component of data collection costs, but there are other costs not included here, such as interviewer administration of the interview and special training for managing the scheduler. So to calculate this, we simply multiplied the average number of contact attempts by the number of cases and by a fixed cost per interviewer attempt. And so what we find is that the treatment group realized modest savings of approximately 10% or $11 per case compared to the control group. Among those using the scheduler, the cost savings were much more substantial, with the cost per case less than half the cost of the control group. So to summarize, the scheduler led to faster study completion and modest reductions in fieldwork effort, and again, modest cost savings across all cases. Notably, respondents who made their own appointments had dramatically lower fieldwork effort and higher cost savings. It's important to mention again that these findings may be biased, as factors related to the reasons that particular respondents take up this scheduler may also affect fieldwork outcomes. Given these cost savings, exploring ways to increase respondents' use of the scheduler seems worthwhile. Usage may increase organically over subsequent waves as respondents get used to the idea of scheduling their own appointments. And the scheduler URL can also be included on respondent websites and promoted in respondent materials and messages. I'm going to shift gears a final time and describe the implementation of a mixed mode design in the 2019 wave of TAS. And this design change comes after 8 prior waves of CADI interviewing. The shift to mixed mode was aimed at reducing costs and increasing respondent cooperation. Our plan was to use lessons learned and apply them to the 2021 wave of core PSID. We implemented this design experimentally to examine the impact of mixing modes on fieldwork outcomes. So in 2019, TAS comprised nearly 3,000 young adults and is, as in prior waves, administered an interview of about 70 minutes over a period of 8 months and provided a $70 post-paid incentive. Following the protocol used in Understanding Society, we randomized 20% to a ring-fence CADI group with no option for using web. The remaining cases were offered web only at the start of the field period. And at week 8, non-responding web cases were called by interviewers and offered CADI, in addition to web, to complete the interview. We used a structured and fairly intensive contact protocol. Following the mailing of the advance letter, the target was for both groups to receive 2 to 3 contact attempts a week using texts and emails, and for the ring fence group, phone calls. Authenticated links were included in messages to web cases so they could drill immediately into the web portal. We found positive effects of this design on response rates. The overall response rate across both modes was nearly 88%. Cases assigned to mixed mode had a response rate of 89.3%, while the ring fence had a response rate of about 82%, nearly 8 percentage points lower. And among cases assigned to mixed mode who completed an interview, nearly 88% did so online and 12% did so by phone. Of those completing online, 2/3 used a cell phone and 1/3 used a laptop or computer. We also found favorable fieldwork outcomes for the cases randomized to mixed mode compared to ring fence. Mixed mode cases required nearly 25% fewer interviewer attempts. The mean number of total contact attempts for mixed mode cases was about 9 fewer compared to ring fence at both the mean and median. And finally, mixed mode cases required about a month less in the field to complete the interview than ring fence cases. A final result, we examined a single measure of data quality for interview cases, the percentage of questions that are asked of respondents for which they do not provide a response. And in a phone interview, this is by explicitly declining to answer or saying, I don't know. In an online interview, this is by simply skipping the item by clicking next. Missing data was relatively low for both groups, but we found a significantly higher rate among those assigned to ring fence compared to the mixed mode cases. Among the mixed mode cases, skipped questions were higher for those completing by phone compared to web. And there were no differences in the skipped question rate among online interviews completed by cell compared to computer. So to summarize, our results were pretty unambiguous. Those randomly assigned to mixed mode compared to ring fence had higher response rates. Their interviews were completed faster and with less interviewer effort. The quality of the data appeared better, and fieldwork costs were also lower. We found that mixed mode cases interviewed by phone were very resource intensive. In the panel study context, having a backup mode for such cases is important. These cases could be targeted when the interviewer calling phase of data collection begins, which should reduce their costs. We are currently conducting additional analyses to examine the impact of mode on other indicators of data quality and across content domains that vary in characteristics such as sensitivity. And finally, the 2021 wave of PSID has made the shift to mixed mode for the first time. It's using a similar design, randomizing 20% of families to ring fence to study mode effects. We're currently collecting data, and we will be able to report on the experience early next year. Several gaps remain in our knowledge for implementing mixed mode designs, and here are just a few areas that could be addressed in future research. First, we need more specificity about optimal contact protocols. For example, what is the optimal number and periodicity of reminder messages? We want to achieve a balance between productive messaging that minimizes respondent burden, along with the consideration of the costs of sending these messages. Another question is, how do day of the week and time in which the messages are sent affect cooperation and response time? And which reminder modes are the most impactful? And does this vary by key respondent characteristics? We can speculate that young adults, for example, may be more responsive to texts than emails. There is also the question of defining the optimal time frame before web cases receive non-response follow-up efforts. We waited 8 weeks before non-response calling, but other timeframes may achieve a better balance between the cost savings of web and allowing enough time to reach response rate goals with interviewer follow-up efforts. In the current study, we randomized respondents to mode without modeling mode preference. In future waves, we can use information from the prior wave to assign mode, and we should also develop additional models to understand respondent characteristics associated with mode preference. I'll close by acknowledging the sponsorship of our funding agencies and provide a list of references for additional information about the research I described. Thank you very much for your time, and congratulations to the Understanding Society study on their 10th anniversary.